The Vorkai had already been on the station for 6 hours before Seven tasted them. She caught it on the third breath cycle. A molecular ghost threaded through the recycled nitrogen, something between scorched metal and the chemical signature of absolute intent. Her tongue processed it in fragments, the desiccant trace of a body that did not sweat, the faint ionization of matter existing at the edge of physical law, and underneath it all, like a baseline note in a frequency no one was supposed to hear, the unmistakable signature of a Vorkai in pre-strike configuration. 6 hours. They had been here for 6 hours, and Seven had not known. She pressed herself against the wall of Junction 7 Delta and executed Sethvel, the Sethura's highest art, the disappearance that was not running but erasure. Scales locked flat, chemical output suppressed to baseline. Tongue withdrawn. She became, to every sensory apparatus known to exist in the catalog galaxy, nothing, not a presence that was hiding, simply an absence, the space between threats. The defector was in the room at the end of the corridor. Dominion Technical Attaché, name redacted from Seven's briefing, valuable enough that someone had paid Vorkai rates to make him cease existing. Seven had 63 minutes until her extraction window. The math of Sethvel said, remain nothing. Let the Vorkai pass to the target. File the loss. Survive. The math of Sethvel did not account for the human. The door at the corridor's far end opened. Not the defector's room, the other door, the maintenance access that Seven had noted as welded shut on her station diagram. It opened anyway, swinging wide with the casual confidence of something that had never considered that doors might be obstacles, and Operative Vasquez stepped through eating something red. Seven's tongue came out involuntarily. The molecular signature of the red object hit her chemoreceptors like a pressure seal blowing. Capsaicin at concentrations that registered, on Seven's internal scale, somewhere between aggressive cleaning solvent and neurotoxic hazard. The human was consuming it, chewing it with the expression of someone passing mile time. Vasquez was compact, dark-haired, dressed in gear that had been repaired at least 4 times in 4 different colors of patch material. She moved through the corridor with a quality that Seven, who had spent her career cataloging movement patterns of 212 species, could not immediately classify. Not stealth, she was making noise, small sounds, boots on deck plating, the soft percussion of equipment. Not aggression. She wasn't scanning aggressively. Something else. Something that her people's movement taxonomy simply did not have a column for. Taking inventory. That was the closest Seven could construct. The human was walking through a corridor in a station that smelled to anything with chemical sense of imminent death. And she was taking inventory. Seven held Sethvel and prayed to the shed gods of her ancestors that the human would not see her. Vasquez stopped. She was 3 body lengths away. She was looking at the ceiling, not at Seven. At a specific junction point in the overhead paneling, a place where 2 ventilation channels met in a dead angle above the lighting strip. Seven looked, saw nothing. The Vorkai left no thermal trace Seven's heat pits could find. The air showed nothing to standard optics. The junction looked like a junction. "Oh," said Vasquez, in a conversational tone that Seven would reconstruct many times in the cycles that followed. "There's one in the ceiling." The thing that dropped from the junction was not entirely there. That was the only way Seven's nervous system could process it. The Vorkai arrived as a convergence, a place where the visual field folded inward and resolved briefly into something that had limbs and intent. It was fast. Everything Seven knew about Vorkai said it would be over before any registered defensive response could. Vasquez was already moving. Not away. The human was moving toward it, ducking under the convergence's first pass with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had done this before and found it manageable. And the blade appeared in her hand as if it had always been there, as if she and it had only been waiting for an appropriate moment to reacquaint. The sound the Vorkai made was wrong. Not wrong in the way that loud things are wrong, or sudden things. Wrong in the way that a sound is wrong when it should not exist at the frequency it is occupying. It registered on 2 of Seven's 3 auditory receptor clusters. The third one went somewhere else. Seven would note in her report that she had not known it could do that. The convergence dispersed. A vorkai in dissolution looked, to Seven's chemoreceptors, like the moment a thunderstorm ends, a sudden absence where pressure had been, and the air uncertain what to do with itself. Vasquez wiped the blade on her thigh and looked across the corridor at Seven. "You want to tell me why you're shaking?" she said. "Or should I handle this first?" Seven had not known she was shaking. The scales along her dorsal ridge were cycling between lock flat and full spread in a pattern her nervous system produced. She had been informed when her higher cognitive functions had temporarily ceded to something older and less reasoned. She stilled them by force. 3 cycles of it. The thing she could not still was the awareness that the human had found a vorkai by walking into the room and reading the air wrong. Seven had been trained to detect them. She had chemical sense that other species he paid significant resources to acquire artificially. She had spent 6 years learning the molecular ghost trail of a vorkai pre-strike configuration, and she had caught it on the 3rd breath cycle. The human had caught it the moment she walked through a door, with no apparent sensory apparatus for the task, chewing a neurotoxic fruit, without even looking up from the ceiling. "There are more," Seven said. Her translator rendered it in standard. She had not intended to speak. Vasquez nodded. "Yeah, I counted 2 more signatures in the west maintenance shaft when I came through." She glanced at the dispersed space where the first one had been, plus whatever that was. So 3 total now, 2. A pause. She tilted her head with the particular quality that Seven would come to recognize as the human running arithmetic. "Unless they called ahead. The vorkai do not." Seven stopped. The vorkai did not communicate during a contract. It was foundational. It was in every intelligence file Seven had ever read about them. The contract was individual, the strike was solitary, the art was silence. "Usually," said Vasquez, and her voice had something in it that Seven's translation matrix filed under mild professional skepticism, but which Seven's chemoreceptors read as something more complicated than that. The red pod was gone. Seven did not know when Vasquez had finished it. She noticed, for reasons that were not entirely clear to her, the way the human's hands were already moving, not reaching for another weapon, not checking her own injuries, not doing any of the things Seven's behavioral files said came after a close engagement survival event. Her hands were moving through the corridor's ambient air with small, deliberate gestures, almost like a conductor's, reading currents Seven couldn't taste. "Defector's still alive," said Vasquez. "Heard him moving 12 seconds ago." She looked at Seven with brown eyes that had, Seven's file on her noted, a particular quality that several alien diplomats had independently described as the look of something that has been the most dangerous thing in many rooms, and has quietly noted this about itself. "We need to move." Seven executed Seth Vel. "Stop that," said Vasquez, not unkindly. "Movement confuses their tracking." Seven stopped. The corridor hummed with the baseline vibration of a station running on emergency power allocation. Through the wall, at a distance Seven's heat pits couldn't reach, but her lower acoustic receptors could. Something that was not quite present was moving through the west maintenance shaft. Coming this way. Taking its time, the way things that do not fear being hunted always take their time. Vasquez held up 2 fingers, pointed at the shaft wall, and then held up 1 finger and pointed at the ceiling junction above them. 2 in the shaft, 1 above. Seven looked at the ceiling. The junction looked like a junction. She looked back at Vasquez. The human had already started walking, heading toward the shaft, toward the things in it, with the detonator still somewhere on her person, and the blade still in her hand, and something in her bearing that Seven's taxonomy could not name, but her oldest nervous system recognized, in the visceral, wordless way that creatures recognize things that have always been true, as apex. Seven followed. Her tongue had retracted completely. She did not notice. She would notice later, and file under stress response, anomalous context, and leave the analysis field blank. Vasquez found a maintenance corridor 7 station diagram listed as a dead end, verified that it was a dead end, and chose it specifically because of this. Seven did not follow that logic. She said so. Best place to set a trap is a place they can only come at from one direction, Vasquez said, already moving along the wall. fingers running the surface with a purposeful attention that Seven's chemical sense could not parse. She was reading the wall, not structurally. She was reading it with her hands, processing something through contact that Seven didn't have a category for. Also, they know I'm here now, so they're going to be adjusting from a suppression and conceal approach to a direct engagement approach, which means they'll come faster, which means I want to set up before they shift fully. The coalition protocol for Vorkai incursion is to seal, signal, and wait for a 40-minute extraction window, said Vasquez, not stopping. Yep, I read your file. Seven processed this. Then, you know the protocol is statistically valid for species that can't fight back. Her hands found something in a wall, a coolant line manifold sealed, the kind of infrastructure that was everywhere in stations like this, and meant nothing until it was open, and it meant everything. We can fight back, so we don't wait. There's a word in Seth Tavrik, that meant something like the predator that does not know it is a predator. It was used in Seven's culture pejoratively, for species that stumbled into danger through ignorance of their own position in a hierarchy they hadn't noticed. Seven had used it internally for humans on approximately 9 separate occasions during her career. She was becoming uncertain it was the right word. Vasquez opened the coolant manifold with a tool she produced from somewhere on her left forearm. Not a proper manifold wrench, something she had clearly made from 2 other things that were not manifold wrenches, a piece of conduit, and what appeared to be part of a dining implement. It worked. She bled the pressure down to a specific value Seven couldn't read without instrumentation, connected something to the output valve using a section of wire that Seven's eye traced back to the station's own ambient sensor net, and then did something with the proximity detector from her own kit that Seven watched 3 times in memory reconstruction and still could not fully explain. The trap that resulted occupied approximately 2 square meters of corridor, was invisible to every standard detection modality Seven could identify, and would trigger, based on what she could observe of the wiring, on the Vorkai's specific thermal absence signature rather than on presence. A trap built specifically for a species that was designed to be untrappable. Seven watched Vasquez's hands through the whole construction. They did not hesitate. There was no wasted motion. Not in the sense of a species that had trained itself to efficiency, but in the sense of a species that did not register uncertainty as a physical state. The hands moved because the mind had already resolved the problem. The motion was simply execution, the thing that struck Seven hardest, and she was recording this now, formally, in the analytical section of her cognition that remained professional through voluntary effort, was that Vasquez was not suppressing fear. Seven could taste her. The human was radiating, chemically, at a level that most prey species would read as extreme distress. Elevated cortisol derivative, elevated adrenaline analog, the full biochemical vocabulary of an organism in mortal danger. And yet the hands did not hesitate. The voice, when it came, was level. The human was afraid and building a trap, simultaneously, without apparent contradiction. Seven's culture had a saying, fear is information. Information guides the feet towards safety. The saying assumed that fear and the action resulting from fear would share the same vector. Vasquez finished the trap, stood, stretched her back with the small, undignified motion of a creature that has been crouching too long and does not find this worth hiding. You're doing the thing where you go still, she said, not looking at Seven. Stop it. Movement confuses their tracking. Seven had not known she was doing it. The Sethvel response had activated without her permission, the way it always did when her nervous system processed sufficient threat data, the automatic elegance of millions of years of evolutionary investment in not being eaten. She let it go with conscious effort. Her scales shifted. She began to radiate again, small and biological and present, and the corridor felt different for it, more occupied, somehow, in a way she hadn't expected. How? Said Seven, and stopped, because the question she was constructing had too many branches. Vasquez looked at her then. The brown eyes were not warm, exactly. Calibrated. How do I know they're tracking thermal absence? A small pause. Worked with one before. Tried to recruit it, actually. The corner of her mouth moved in a direction Seven's expression taxonomy classified as humor, dark variety. That didn't work out. A vorkai, said Seven. They're not uncontactable. Most people just don't try. She turned back to face the corridor entrance. Or they try once. The implication of once sat in the recycled air between them. Seven tasted it. Her tongue ran twice across the chemical signature of the word, and found that the second reading was worse than the first. The trap triggered. The sound was wrong again, a different register this time, higher, more dispersed, the sound of something that had been in one configuration and was no longer. Seven's third auditory cluster didn't go offline this time. It simply filed the frequency under a label that already existed in her taxonomy, but that she had never expected to use. Predator neutralized. One down, said Vasquez. She said it the way Seven's data entry subroutines recorded a completed field. Accurate. Minimal. Moving to the next item. Seven scales had gone through their cycling pattern again without her noticing. She stilled them. Her tongue was still out, reading the air, reading the human who was standing at the edge of her own trap, and tilting her head at the corridor the way a species reads the middle distance when it is listening for something it expects to hear, because it expects to hear it, because it sent something there, because it is the kind of creature that sends things into the dark and waits to hear back. Seven noted the capsaicin zero chemical signature of the space where the second vorkai had been. Dissolution. Genuine, physical, permanent dissolution. She noted this in her formal analytical record, and then held very still. Not Sethvel, not the vanishing art of her people, but simply the stillness of a creature that has seen something it is still processing, occupying the corridor with her own warm chemical presence because a human told her to, because some part of her architecture had already decided that this was good advice. Seven had cataloged 47 species responses to the vorkai death shriek. The taxonomy had been simple to build. Paralysis in 22 species. Evacuation behavior in 14. Involuntary sonic response, screaming, in colloquial terms, in 8. One species, the Dovari, produced a color change so total and so rapid that 3 documented cases had resulted in cardiac events. None of the 47 had been laughter. Not the laughter of relief. Not the laughter of hysteria, which Seven had learned was a human response to extreme stress that other species sometimes misread as enjoyment. This was quieter than that. Vasquez, lowering herself to sit against the wall in the aftermath of the second kill, made a sound through her nose that her facial muscles accompanied with a shape that Seven's expression taxonomy called genuine amusement, and filed in the same register as Seven might file current atmospheric composition. Nominal. Seven watched her. The chemical record of the moment was a complicated thing. Dissolution residue from the second vorkai, the human's own biochemical signature. Fear markers still elevated but beginning the long slope downward, exhaustion compounds beginning to appear in the output of a body that had been at peak operational demand for a sustained period. And under all of that, something Seven had no molecular label for. A compound her receptors detected clearly, but her taxonomy had never categorized. She constructed a new field. Left the name blank for now. Vasquez unholstered her primary sidearm, sat on her knee, and began to disassemble it. From memory, by feel, with the corridor at minimal lighting, and the parts laid out in an order that Seven found herself memorizing despite no operational reason to do so. Trigger assembly first, then the receiver group, the barrel, the guide rod, the recoil spring. Laid out in a specific order on the deck, plating like something being shown rather than something being serviced. Ask, said Vasquez, without looking up. Seven considered whether to. The Seth-era intelligence service had trained her to collect data without the subject knowing they were being studied. A direct question introduced variables. It also, her trainer's voice reminded her from long memory, produced answers that were harder to falsify than behavior. How many times, said Seven, have you engaged a vorkai contract? Vasquez's hands paused. Not hesitation, Seven thought, but the natural stillness of a mind sorting through records. Contract, as in, someone hired them for a specific target? Yes. Including today? Yes. Twice before. Her hands resumed. Barrel cleaning now, a small cloth produced from somewhere and run through the bore with the automatic ease of something done thousands of times. First time was a misidentification. They were contracted on a Dominion logistics officer. My unit was moving through the same station. Collateral threat. A pause. Second time was on me. And my unit. The corridor had the station's baseline hum. The emergency power allocation was running 2 cycles below standard. The lighting strip at 7's end had a flaw, a flicker at the boundary of perceptible. Her heat pits caught it every 4th cycle. Your unit, said 7. 6 operatives. Good people. Vasquez ran the cloth again. Lost 4 in the first 12 hours. The Vorkai that contract ran 8 assets. A beat. 4 of mine to 8 of theirs. Means they were paying a lot, or the contract was personal. She set the cloth down and picked up the receiver group. Figure the math was simple. 7's tongue retracted. Not the Seth-Vel, not the controlled art of it, the voluntary vanishing. Just the reflex. The pure, old, wordless reflex of a nervous system encountering something it cannot immediately process through the higher faculties and choosing to close down input while the rest of the cognition catches up. The Sethera had a word, Velthasura, for the grief that comes after a correct loss. The acknowledgement of what is gone, and the rational forward motion that follows. Every species 7 had ever studied had an equivalent. The Velhari called a keth. The Dominion's primary cultural species had 7 variations of it, ordered by relationship proximity of the lost. Even a Vorkai had a version, or so the file suggested, an in-contract dissolution of a partner unit recognized and incorporated the mission continuing. The math was simple, 7 said. 4 of mine, said Vasquez, in the same tone she'd said it before. Yeah. The parts lay on the deck in their ordered row. 7 looked at them. The trigger assembly was slightly worn at the pivot point. A replacement was available from any coalition requisition depot, but it had not been replaced, which meant either the human did not have access to requisition or did not want it. The barrel had 3 small marks that 7 recognized as from close-range discharge at an angle that put the weapon practically inside the target. 3 times. The grip had been wrapped and rewrapped in a synthetic compound that was not standard issue, something the human had added, something chosen rather than assigned. She studied the 9th small scratch in the receiver finish very carefully and did not look at Vasquez's face. The Vorkai, 7 said, do not have records, open records, of failed contracts on humans. Vasquez looked up. I know. The sealed files, I know. Her hands reassembled the weapon. Not slowly. 7 timed it involuntarily because timing was what her cognition did when it was not sure what else to do with a moment. 41 seconds. Darkness except for the flicker of the lighting strip. By touch. By memory. By the routine of an organism that had done this in dark and cold and field conditions and had learned that familiarity was a kind of armor. There are things the Vorkai don't publish about their failed contracts. And there are things the people who survive them don't publish either. She chambered around. Keeps the market functioning. 7 was quiet for a duration she later calculated as 11 seconds. A very long silence for a Sethera whose culture treated pauses above 3 seconds as communicative statements in themselves. To remain, 7 said at last. Yeah. Vasquez stood. The small sounds of a body returning to operational verticality. Not young, 7 noted, not old, somewhere in the long middle of a species that healed its bones stronger at the breakpoint and carried its damage as information rather than impairment. Ready when you are. 7 looked at the disassembled and reassembled weapon, at the worn trigger pivot, at the 3 barrel marks from impossible angles. She looked at Vasquez. What is the Sethera word? Said Vasquez, with the particular precision of someone who has done some reading, for the thing where you go perfectly still. Seth-Vel, said 7. Vasquez nodded, in the way she nodded at things she was storing. You stopped doing it. You told me to. I did. A brief silence. The lighting strip flickered. Does it bother you? Stopping. 7 considered the question with more attention than it appeared to warrant. The Seth-Vel was not merely a tactic. It was in Sethera culture the acknowledgement of hierarchy, the rational gesture of a creature that knows the predator in the room and adjusts accordingly. To execute Seth Vell was to be correct. To fail to execute, it was to be either very brave or very foolish, and her culture did not draw a strong distinction between those states. It does not, she said. The answer surprised her. She noted this. Vasquez turned for the corridor entrance. Stay close. Don't go quiet. If I hold up a fist, drop flat. Not still, flat, different thing. She checked something on the device at her wrist. 40 minutes. 7 moved. The corridor carried her chemical signature, warm and present alongside the human's own biochemical output. Fear markers still there, the long slope of them. And under them the compound 7 still hadn't named, but was beginning to recognize as something the Seth-era language simply hadn't needed before now. Something that was not the absence of fear, but the presence of something that had decided fear was not the largest thing in the room. The Vorkai called the rest of them, and 7 had not known they could do that. The file said they didn't. The files were specific. The Vorkai contract model was singular, isolated. The entire value proposition of the service was that it could not be traced, coordinated, or countered as a collective because it was not a collective. Each unit operated independently. That was the architecture. That was 3,000 years of recorded precedent. The files were wrong. 7 tasted it before she could process what she was tasting. A signal in the air that was less chemistry than physics, a kind of resonance that her sensory organs hadn't been designed for, but which her nervous system, operating below the level of train analysis, registered as more coming. More of the not quite present. More of the convergence and intent. The 2 in the west maintenance shaft had been joined by 3 new signatures. The Vorkai taste spreading through the station's atmospheric circulation like a slow tide, calmly, with the patience of something that does not experience time pressure, because it has never had to. Vasquez said they called for backup. 7's tongue ran through the confirmation she had already arrived at. 5 total. Yep. Vasquez pulled up her wrist display. The screen cracked. The data is still readable. The countdown at 37 minutes. Comms were dark. The station's long-range array had gone offline 12 minutes ago, and 7's independent transmitter showed a jamming field she had never seen employed at this frequency range, a Vorkai capability that also, notably, was not in any of the files. 7 ran the math. She was trained in tactical probability assessment. It was foundational to intelligence work, the ability to generate accurate estimates under incomplete information and present them without the emotional distortion that compromised the utility of the output. She ran the math as cleanly as she could. 5 Vorkai-class interdiction units, she said. 1 human operative. 1 Seth-era analyst with no close combat rating. No communications. No extraction certainty. She processed the next 37 minutes against the known engagement parameters. The probability of mission success by standard coalition models is, can you hold a detonator? 7 stopped. Vasquez was looking at her with the calibrated brown eyes. Not urgency. Something past urgency, something that was on the other side of the calculation urgency, comes from a place 7's taxonomy reached for and found unstocked. You are asking me, said 7 carefully, if I am able to physically hold thumb trigger standard pressure activation. Your grip geometry works. A pause that 7's higher cognition used to verify this was actually happening. I need both hands free for the approach. You trigger when I signal. Single signal. 7 looked at the detonator Vasquez was extending. It was standard Terran manufacture. The Seth-era intelligence service had conducted technical assessments of human ordnance as part of standard cross-species capability evaluation, and this model was in the files. Mass, 0.14 standard weight units. Trigger pressure, 2.3 kilograms. Activation radius for the explosive compound Vasquez had assembled from coolant precipitate and something from her kit whose chemical signature 7 had not finished analyzing. Approximately 18 meters. If I trigger it at the wrong moment, 7 said. Then we die faster, said Vasquez, and her mouth made the dark humor shape again, but at least we don't find out what a Vorkai does when it's taking its time. 7 took the detonator. It was warm from Vasquez's hand. This was 7 new, because the human ran approximately 1 degree warmer than Seth-era standard, a function of the Death World thermoregulation model that produced a constant low-level heat output across the whole body surface. Inefficient from a thermal regulation standpoint, and yet producing the result that every human thing Seven had touched today was warm in the specific way that living things that have decided to stay living tend to be warm. Her coils wrapped it. The weight was unfamiliar. The task was unfamiliar. She was an analyst. She sat at terminals and processed chemical data from remote sensors and produced assessments that other beings used to make the decisions that actually mattered. That was her role. That was the architecture. Vasquez did not thank her for taking it, did not offer reassurance about Seven's ability to execute the task, did not calculate aloud the probability that an analyst in a situation she had not been trained for would flinch or fail. She simply nodded, the same nod she had given the weapon check, the same nod she gave the wall she read with her hands. The nod of someone for whom a resolved question is a resolved question, and there is no value in revisiting it, as if it had never been in question. 7 scales cycled. She stilled them, and for the first time in the station and this mission and this long, wrong day, the stilling felt not like suppression, but like something chosen. The 5 Vorkai signatures were moving. Not together. The Seth-era architecture of intelligence analysis categorized what she was tasting as 3 direct approach, 2 flanking, the kind of coordinated geometry that a thing employs when it has concluded that the other thing in the room is worth coordinating against, which is its own kind of acknowledgement. Single signal, said Vasquez. Yes. She looked at 7 for one more breath cycle. Something in the look, 7's translation matrix reached for trust and found it inadequate, reached for assignment, and found it too cold, reached for a third option, and found only the blank field she'd been leaving all day. Then she moved into the dark ahead of them, toward the 3 direct signatures, moving with the loud and present quality of a creature that had decided to be the largest thing in the room and was walking into the room to prove it. 7 held the detonator. The station hummed. Somewhere above and to the left, a Vorkai convergence was solving for her location and coming to a conclusion she was not going to help it reach, because she was not still, she was present, she was warm and breathing and running a new piece of analysis she had not been trained for and could not entirely name. She did not execute Seth Vel. She had not, she realized, done so since the second kill. She followed. Later, when 7 filed her report, she would write, "The operative engaged 5 Vorkai-class interdiction units in close-quarters combat and achieved mission success." She would not write what she saw. She would not write about the way Vasquez moved through the station's forward compartments. Not fast, not frantic, but with a relentlessness that 7's movement taxonomy kept failing to categorize correctly. It was not pursuit. The Vorkai were not running. It was not aggression in the classical sense, which her files described as high-energy, high-visibility, high-risk acceptance engagement behavior. It was something more deliberate than aggression. Aggression had an emotional temperature. This was cold. This was methodical in the way that a process is methodical. Step, outcome, step, outcome, and the steps were happening very fast, but the temperature never changed. She would not write about the first one, the Vorkai that had taken the ceiling junction position and dropped in what should have been an undefensible angle, and what Vasquez did in the 2 seconds before 7's system fully registered what was happening, because writing it accurately would require a clinical notation that she did not have the vocabulary for yet, and did not want to construct from borrowed terms. She would write, "First unit, neutralized, 7 seconds." She would not write about the second and third ones from the west shaft, which came together because they were coordinating, because whatever the file said, they were doing something new, and what that engagement sounded like specifically, or what 7 tasted in the air during it, or the moment when her heat pits registered the thermal signature of both convergences dispersing within 4 seconds of each other, which was not a thing she had expected to happen, and which her probability model was still attempting to reconcile when the 4th Vorkai arrived. She would write, "Second and third units, neutralized, simultaneous engagement, 22 seconds. The 4th one targeted 7. This was not in her model. The Vorkai were contracted on the defector. Seven was not the target. She was not relevant to the contract. The contract architecture was specific about relevance. But contracts, apparently, like files and models and 3,000 years of recorded precedent, were adjustable when something decided to adjust them, and the fourth Vorkai convergence resolved itself out of the atmospheric circulation 9 meters from 7 with the specific directional intent of something that had decided she was the variable creating friction. The detonator was in her grip. Vasquez's signal was a single sharp percussive sound. Not a word, a sound, the kind of sound a body makes when it is committed to a movement and has shed everything optional. Seven heard it through 2 auditory clusters and the vibration receptors along her ventral surface simultaneously. She triggered the detonator. The corridor became wrong for approximately 1 second. Sound at 2 frequencies. Light from somewhere it shouldn't have been. And then the dissolution of 2 Vorkai simultaneously, the fourth that had been coming for her, and the fifth that had arrived on Vasquez's position at exactly the wrong moment, which was perhaps not coincidence and perhaps not accident, and perhaps was exactly the geometry Vasquez had been building since she opened that coolant manifold. The station smelled of dissolution and recycled nitrogen, and the particular chemical signature of an oxygen atmosphere species that had been at maximal physical output for 40 minutes and had come out the other side. Seven did not move for a duration she later calculated as 8 seconds. Vasquez walked into the space between the dissolutions, checked the corridor in both directions with the inventory taking quality 7 had first observed what felt like a very long time ago, and then sat down on the deck plating. Not collapsed, sat. With intention. The way a creature sits when it has decided that this is a moment to be present in, and the floor is as good a place as any to be present from. She checked her hands for injuries with the same professional detachment as a post-mission equipment inventory. She looked at Seven. "You did good," she said. Seven looked at her own coil. The detonator casing was empty now. The compound expended, the function completed. The casing was still warm in her grip. Vasquez's warmth, she thought, and then set that thought aside to look at more carefully later. The station hummed. In the room at the end of the corridor, behind a sealed door, the defector was still alive. Seven could taste his chemical signature, elevated cortisol, elevated fear output, alive. Vasquez was checking her comms. The jamming field had dropped with the 5th dispersal, and the extraction window had 4 minutes remaining. 4 minutes. They had against 5 Vorkai, a full Vorkai field deployment operating under coordinated contract conditions that the file said could not exist, with 1 analyst and 1 operative and no backup, and a station running on emergency power. They had 40 minutes, and they had come out the other side with 4 minutes left in the window, with the defector alive, with Seven holding an empty detonator casing in a grip that did not shake. Seven thought about the word Seth Vel. She had not executed it since the second kill. 6 hours ago, she had pressed herself against a wall and become nothing because that was the highest art she knew, the most sophisticated response to a predator that her civilization had produced across its entire history. And then a human had walked into the corridor, eating a neurotoxin, and told her with the specific authority of someone who was not offering a suggestion to stop doing that. And she had stopped, and they were alive. She filed this in her formal analytical record under a heading she had never used before, and which she was constructing for the first time in real time from available vocabulary. The field was new. She was not sure the language she'd been born in had the right words for it. Standard had some approximations. She would work with those. She set the detonator casing down on the deck. Gently, for a reason that was not tactically necessary. The extraction signal came through on Vasquez's wrist display. 2 minutes. Defector secure, said Vasquez. Confirmed, said Seven. Coalition team outside. Confirmed. Vasquez stood. Stretch her back again with the small, undignified motion of her species that Seven had decided to stop cataloging as a stress response anomaly and start cataloging as simply a quality of the species, a thing they did, the way a Cythera's tongue read the air, unremarkable to the one doing it, and legible once you knew how to look as information. They walked the corridor toward the extraction point. The station hummed around them. The 5 dissolution spaces were already clearing. The molecular signature of a Vorkai dissolution was brief, a few atmospheric cycles, and then gone, as if the not quite present did not leave residue, because it had never been fully here to begin with. 7 walked, and did not practice Seth Vel, and did not feel the absence of it. At the extraction door, Vasquez stopped, turned, looked at 7 with the calibrated brown eyes in a way that was a different look than the look 7 had been studying all day. Quieter. Still, something in it that 7's expression taxonomy had a word for, but which she was not certain she had seen before when directed at herself. "First time working a Vorkai contact?" said Vasquez. "Yes," said 7. Vasquez nodded. Turned back to the door. "You'll get used to it." 7 considered whether this was a reassurance or a warning. Her translation matrix offered both options with equal probability weights, and she did not adjudicate between them, because she had a strong intuition that for this species, they were the same thing. The extraction team came through. Noise. Light. The defector extracted from his room and moving under escort. Voices in Standard and 2 other languages 7 identified as Coalition allied. The station coming back to full operational lighting. The recycled air shifting as the jamming field's residual interference cleared from the atmospheric processors. 7 filed her report from the extraction transport. The fields were standard. She filled them in with the care and precision her training required. When she reached the final field, analyst assessment, operational impact, she held the stylus over the input surface for a long time. She wrote, "Human operatives of Vasquez-class combat specialization demonstrate capabilities not currently reflected in coalition engagement doctrine. Recommend doctrinal review." She looked at this for a while. She added, "The analyst pre-mission threat model was insufficient. Updated threat model to follow." She looked at this. She left the next field blank. Some things didn't fit in a field. Some things needed a new field entirely, and the new field needed a name she didn't have yet, and she had learned something today about what to do when you don't have a name for a thing. You hold in your grip, warm from someone else's hand, and you carry it forward until the language catches up. 7 closed the report. Outside the transport's viewport, the station dwindled against the stars. She did not look away until it was gone. A deep space relay station interior, long institutional corridor bathed in cool blue-white emergency lighting, walls lined with exposed conduit and sensor arrays. The corridor is empty, but the air has a faint shimmer near the ceiling junction, a barely visible distortion of light suggesting an unseen presence. The mood is tense silence, the quality of a space that doesn't know it has already been compromised. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. A close-up of a serpentine alien, Cethera species, sleek scale body approximately 2.4 meters long, no limbs, ventral locomotion scales iridescent gray-green, a forked tongue extended and, reading the air, heat pit organs visible as subtle depressions near the jaw. Her scales are locked flat and, faintly pale, a biological fear response. She presses herself against the corridor wall, perfectly still, becoming part of the architecture. Emergency blue light catches the underside of her scales. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The same deep space relay station corridor, now with a distant door swinging open against all logic. Beyond it, the maintenance access. A compact human woman, Vasquez, steps through, dark-haired, mid-30s, wearing patched and repatched tactical gear in mismatched repair colors, a small red pod between her fingers. Her expression is entirely calm. Behind her, the door had clearly been welded shut. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Close-up detail shot, a human hand holding a small red capsicum pod between 2 fingers. The skin of the hand is scarred across the knuckles. The gear sleeve is visibly patched in 2 colors. The background is the blue-lit corridor. The image implies danger through the ordinary object, something being consumed casually in a place that smells like death. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The Cethra Alien 7, scaled serpentine body pressed flat against the wall in full biological stillness, watching the human Vasquez from across the corridor. Vasquez is looking up at the ceiling junction, a specific section of overhead paneling where two ventilation channels converge. Her posture is reading the space, head tilted, one hand slightly raised. The corridor between them is lit by the flicker of an emergency strip. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Vasquez, human female in patch tactical gear, facing upward at the ceiling as a Vorkai begins to manifest. A convergence of semi-corporeal gaseous energy, where the visual field seems to fold inward and briefly resolve into a form with suggestion of limbs and direction. The thing has no clear shape, but absolute presence. Vasquez is not retreating. Her hand has a blade in it that appears from nowhere. Dramatic light from the convergence itself. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Vasquez in motion. A blur of compact human form ducking under the first pass of the Vorkai convergence. The blade extended, her face lit from below by the energy of the semi-corporeal entity. The motion is not frantic, it is precise. She is inside the attack, not fleeing it. The corridor walls show motion blur. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The Vorkai in dissolution. The convergence scattering into dispersed atmospheric residue, a cloud of ionized particles, and fading light. The visual impression of something that was briefly present becoming absent again. Vasquez stands in the dissipating cloud, blade held low, expression unchanged. The corridor returns to emergency blue. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The Cethra Alien 7, coiled in the corridor, scales cycling between locked flat pale and full spread reactive pattern, a visible biological stress response. Her tongue is fully retracted. She is staring at the space where the Vorkai dissolved. The emergency lighting catches the underside of her iridescent scales in a pattern that reads as shock. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Vasquez wiping the blade on her thigh. Casual, looking across the corridor at 7 with calibrated brown eyes. The gesture is practical, not theatrical. The corridor shows the faint residue shimmer of dissolution. Between them, the distance is exactly the distance of two creatures reassessing each other. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The relay station corridor, wider angle, showing Vasquez in the foreground holding up two fingers pointed at a shaft wall, then one finger pointed at the ceiling, tactical indication of hidden positions. 7 is visible coiled against the wall behind her. Both faces are turned toward different threats. The station architecture suggests industrial deep space construction. Heavy hull plating, exposed conduit bundles, bioluminescent emergency strips. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Vasquez moving through the corridor ahead, the inventory-taking quality of her movement visible. She is loud, present, boots on deck plating, equipment shifting. Beside her the smaller coiled form of 7, moving now, not still, both visible against the blue institutional lighting. Ahead, darkness. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. A dead-end maintenance corridor in the relay station. Narrower, walls closer, conduit and infrastructure more exposed. Vasquez stands at the far wall with one hand flat against the surface, reading it through touch. Her gear is visible from behind. The patch repairs, the equipment load, the quality of someone who carries function over aesthetics. 7 watches from the entrance. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Close-up of Vasquez's hands working on a coolant line manifold in the station wall. The hands are scarred, efficient, using a tool that is clearly improvised, a piece of conduit married to what appears to be a broken dining implement. The manifold is open, pressure releasing, wire connections being made with precision. The hands do not hesitate. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. A trap being constructed. Vasquez connecting wire from the station's ambient sensor net to the output valve of a coolant manifold, then configuring a proximity detector removed from her own kit. The components are low-tech, entirely environmental, adapted from infrastructure already present in the corridor. The result is invisible to standard detection, but lethal to a specific signature. Close-up construction shot. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The HFY watching Vasquez work on the trap, her serpentine form coiled in the maintenance corridor behind the human. Seven's tongue is extended, reading chemical signatures from a human, the complex biological output of controlled fear combined with focused cognition. The alien's head is tilted at the angle of deep analysis. The corridor is narrow and close. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Vasquez standing upright after completing the trap, stretching her back with a small, unself-conscious motion. The trap behind her is invisible in the corridor, its danger hidden in the architecture. Her expression is moving towards something like mild satisfaction at a completed task. Seven observes her from the side. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Two-shot. Vasquez looking at Seven with calibrated brown eyes, slightly turned, an expression that Seven's alien taxonomy files as something between professional assessment and an offer. Seven's scales are partially spread, her tongue out, reading the air. The corridor behind them shows the completed trap zone. Between them, the beginning of something that neither species has a word for. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The maintenance corridor, the trap zone, as a Vorkai convergence enters it from the far end. The visual field at the corridor mouth distorts, the gaseous semi-corporeal mass moving with absolute confidence, unaware of the invisible geometry it is walking into. Vasquez and Seven are not visible, they are around the corner. The trap waits. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The trap triggering. An explosion of coolant precipitate chemical reaction and proximity sensor activation. The corridor flooded with a high-frequency dissolution effect, the Vorkai convergence scattering mid-approach. The sound wave visible as distortion in the air. The corridor walls show the physical impact of a detonation that was designed for something that isn't quite physically present. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Aftermath of the second Vorkai kill. The maintenance corridor settling, residue dispersing, emergency lighting returning to baseline flicker. Vasquez stands at the edge of the trap zone looking at what was and is no longer there. Her posture is exactly the same as before. She says one word. Seven is visible behind her, scales cycling. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The HFY in the maintenance corridor, scales running through their biological stress response cycling pattern, alternating between locked flat pale and full spread reactive. She is looking at the dissolution residue in the air where the second Vorkai was. Her tongue is reading the absence chemistry of the space. The emergency lighting catches her iridescent gray-green scales in a complex pattern. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Vasquez sitting with her back against the maintenance corridor wall. Chosen to sit, not collapsed, a deliberate act of presence. She has her primary sidearm on her knee and is beginning to field strip it. Her expression shows the first signs of exhaustion compounds in her chemistry, the long slope after peak demand. Seven is settling into a coil across from her. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Close-up of the field-stripped weapon parts laid out in precise order on the deck plating. Each component occupying a specific position, trigger assembly, receiver group, barrel, guide rod, recoil spring. The ordering has the quality of something being shown rather than something merely disassembled. The floor of the station corridor around the parts is scarred metal. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Vasquez's hands working on the weapon components in minimal corridor lighting, confident, without hesitation, the motor memory of thousands of repetitions. The barrel being run through with a small cloth. Close-up of the hands against the parts, the worn texture of scarred skin on metal. The barrel shows 3 close-range discharge marks at impossible angles. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The Seth-era 7 studying the weapon parts on the floor with intense, chemoreceptor-driven attention. Her tongue is extended toward the components, reading molecular history from the metal. Her head is angled downward, the heat pit organs oriented toward the trigger assembly. She is doing analysis in the only way her species knows how. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Two-shot in the corridor. Vasquez looking up from the weapon parts with brown eyes that carry something difficult. Not emotion as display, but the chemical fact of it. 7 across from her, reading the air between them with her tongue extended. The maintenance corridor is dim. The moment has weight. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. A memory image. A different station, 3 years ago. Suggestion of battle damage. Emergency lighting for empty positions in a team of 6. The image has the quality of something being described rather than shown. Slightly diffuse. Lighting warm amber rather than blue. Vasquez is younger in the suggestion of the scene. Same bearing, same calibrated eyes. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Close focus. The 9th scratch in the receiver finish of the disassembled weapon. A small detail, photographically isolated. A mark in the metal that carries history. The detail is studied with disproportionate attention by someone who cannot look at the face of the person it belongs to. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Vasquez reassembling the weapon in darkness. The corridor lighting at absolute minimum. Her hands working entirely by touch and memory. The sequence of assembly is visible as motion through the dim. Her expression shows nothing extraneous. The timer on her wrist reads 41 seconds. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Vasquez standing in the corridor after reassembly, weapon chambered, looking at 7 with calibrated eyes. The look has the quality of an offer being made without being stated. 7 is coiled. Still, the detonator moment approaching. The station hums around them. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The relay station corridor from above, wide establishing shot showing Vasquez and 7 moving together away from the maintenance dead end, toward the forward compartments where new signatures have arrived. 5 Vorkai signatures as barely visible atmospheric distortions in the distance. The human and the alien are small in the frame, but moving. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. An atmospheric monitoring display. Fictional alien design holographic interface showing 5 chemical signature markers in the station's atmospheric circulation map. 3 marked as direct approach. 2 marked as flanking geometry. The data is clinical, precise, and represents an impossibility. Coordinated Vorkai deployment. A Seth-era tongue visible at the edge of frame, reading the display. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Vasquez studying her cracked wrist display showing the countdown timer, 37 minutes, against a dark background. The comms indicator shows offline. The station's long-range array is dead. Her face in the blue light of the display shows her running arithmetic. 7's coiled form is visible behind her. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The detonator, standard Terran manufacture, compact, thumb trigger activation, held out in a human hand toward a serpentine alien. Vasquez extending the device to 7, her expression communicating exactly the weight and expectation of the gesture without verbally describing it. 7's head and the beginning of her coils are visible reaching toward the offered object. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Close up, the detonator passing from human hand to serpentine alien coil. Vasquez's scarred fingers releasing the device. 7's gray-green coils wrapping around it. The device small against the alien's grip, warm from human body temperature. A moment of transfer. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The Cethera 7 holding the detonator in her coiled grip, the device wrapped securely, her scales tight around it. Her expression has shifted. The scales are not cycling their stress response pattern. Something has settled. The corridor behind her is lit by emergency blue. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Vasquez nodding at 7, a single brief, complete acknowledgement that is not thanks and not assessment, but something between them. The nod of a resolved question. 7 receives it. The corridor stretches ahead. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Vasquez moving away into the dark ahead. Her figure retreating into the lower-lit forward corridor. The back of her patched tactical gear visible. Boots loud on deck plating. Moving toward 5 Vorkai signatures. Not running. Walking. Taking inventory of everything ahead of her. 7 watches her go. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The Cethera 7 in the corridor, holding the detonator in her coils, watching Vasquez disappear into the dark. 7 is not executing Sethvel. She is present, scales normal, tongue reading the air, body warm and radiating. She is choosing to be loud and visible and alive in a corridor full of things that kill. For the first time today, the choice is deliberate. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. 7 moving through the forward corridor after Vasquez. The serpentine form in motion, ventral scales working against the deck, head up and alert, tongue extended and reading. The detonator is visible in her coils. She is following. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The relay station's forward compartments, wider, higher ceilinged, more exposed infrastructure. 5 Orkai signature distortions are visible as faint atmospheric aberrations in different positions. Ceiling junction, 2 doorways, 1 corridor intersection, 1 atmospheric vent. The human figure of Vasquez is a small, solid, warm presence moving through them. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Vasquez in the forward compartment. The first ceiling junction Vorkai beginning to manifest above her. The convergence is forming fast, the semi-corporeal gaseous mass resolving with intent. Vasquez is already moving, not away, blade forward, her posture communicating the specific quality of a species that processes this as a logistical problem. 7 watches from the corridor entrance. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The first forward compartment engagement. Vasquez inside the convergence of the Vorkai attack, the blade making contact with something that is barely physical, her face calm and lit by the energy of the dissolving entity. The dissolution is beginning. 7 registers this from a distance, detonator in coils. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The first Vorkai of the forward compartments in dissolution, 7 seconds into the engagement. Vasquez standing in the dissolving cloud, checking her next angle already. The station around her shows the distortion patterns of multiple approaching signatures. She is running toward the second and third without pause. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. 2 Vorkai convergences in the west shaft corridor, both partially manifest, both oriented on a human target that has come to find them rather than hide from them. Vasquez at the corridor entrance, moving in. The visual impression of 2 converging threats against 1 very compact human who has decided the math is workable. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The simultaneous engagement. Vasquez between 2 Vorkai convergences in the narrow shaft corridor, both converging, the blade and a secondary device from her kit working in different directions simultaneously. The corridor is lit by the energy of both manifestations. Vasquez is not between them. She is working both angles. 22 seconds. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Double dissolution. Both west shaft Vorkai dispersing within 4 seconds of each other, the corridor filling with dual atmospheric dissolution clouds that overlap and mix. Vasquez stands at the center of it, checking her status, moving toward the next signature already. The chemistry of two simultaneous dispersals is visible as two different toned energy clouds. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The fourth Vorkai, its convergence forming directly in the corridor with 7. The semi-corporeal mass is orienting on the Seth-era analyst, not the defector, not the human operative. The change of target, the aberration in the contract. 7 visible in the frame, detonator and coils, facing the convergence that is coming for her specifically. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Close-up, 7's coiled grip tightening around the detonator as the fourth Vorkai convergence approaches. Her scales are not cycling the stress pattern. Her tongue is extended, reading the signature of the approaching entity. Her thumb is on the trigger surface. The detonator warm in her grip. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The signal, a single sharp percussive sound from Vasquez's position, the human body committing fully to a movement and shedding everything optional. 7 receiving the signal, her head snapping in the direction of the sound, the detonator already in activation position. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The detonation, a corridor full of simultaneous dissolution events. The fourth Vorkai targeted on 7. The fifth Vorkai that arrived on Vasquez's position at exactly the wrong moment, both catching the radius of the coolant precipitate charge. The corridor becomes wrong for 1 second. Sound at 2 frequencies, light from a source that shouldn't exist, dissolution clouds overlapping. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The station corridor in the aftermath of the detonation, 2 dissolution clouds clearing, the air rich with residue chemistry, emergency lighting returning, the physical world reasserting itself. Vasquez walking through the space between the dissipating clouds, checking both directions with inventory taking calm. 7 visible behind her, still holding the empty casing. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Vasquez sitting down on the deck, plating, deliberate, chosen with intention. Not collapsed, not exhausted past function, simply present. She is checking her hands for injury with the methodical attention of a post-mission equipment check. Her face shows the long slope downward from peak operational demand. The corridor around her shows dissolution residue. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The Seth-era 7, coiled in the corridor aftermath, looking at her own grip where the detonator casing rests warm in her coils. Her scales are not cycling. Her tongue is out, reading the air. Her expression, the specific combination of scale position and tongue behavior and heat pit orientation that constitutes Seth-era emotional display, shows something that her species taxonomy does not have a clean word for. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The defector's door at the end of the corridor, sealed, intact, the chemical signature of the living person behind it drifting under the gap. A door that held. A person who survived. Viewed from a distance by 7, who is processing the fact of this outcome against everything her tactical probability model said would happen. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Vasquez looking at 7 from across the corridor floor. The calibrated brown eyes with the quieter look, the one that 7's expression taxonomy has a word for but has not previously received. It is directed at her. The station is beginning its emergency lighting shift toward full operational power. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The extraction team arriving. Multiple beings in coalition gear moving through the reopened station entrance. Light and noise and voices in multiple languages flooding the formerly silent corridor. The defector moving under escort. Vasquez standing to receive the team with the same inventory-taking calm. 7 still coiled nearby, processing the sudden increase in atmospheric input. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Wider shot of the relay station as the extraction team moves through its corridors. Coalition personnel in varied species-adapted gear moving with urgent efficiency. The station fully lit now. The threat gone. Vasquez walking alongside the defector escort. 7 moving independently. The empty detonator casing still in her coils. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Interior of an extraction transport. A smaller, faster vessel compared to the station. Utilitarian design. Bench seating for multiple species. 7 is coiled in an analyst station position with a report interface open before her. The input surface glows softly. The first fields are filled. The last field is blank. Through the transport's small viewport, the relay station is visible shrinking in the distance. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Close-up of 7's report interface. Alien design holographic text display. The report fields partially visible. The narrative fields are filled in with precise, clinical language. The final field, analyst assessment, operational impact, shows 2 complete lines of text and then a blank. The cursor blinks. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The Cythera 7, coiled in the extraction transport, holding the empty detonator casing in her coils, still warm, still held, set down gently on the surface beside her with the careful attention given to something that is not tactically necessary to retain, but which she retains anyway. The transport hums. The viewport shows stars. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. 7's view from the transport viewport. The relay station dwindling against the star field, growing smaller, becoming just another point of light among many. The station where something happened that does not fit in a field. The view is framed by the transport's hull. The stars do not move. The station disappears. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Final image. The star field through the transport viewport. Vast, cold, unchanged. Somewhere in it, the relay station is gone from view. In the transport, a serpentine alien with gray-green iridescent scales is looking out at it. She is not practicing Sethvel. She is simply present, warm, visible, carrying something forward into the dark. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting.